Hi, Taurus. Welcome to your November 2018 Astro Update. It's Rena here, and November is, I think, kind of a game changer for all of us because we are seeing two longer-term transits occurring back to back, and both of them, to me, are very positive influences overall, and they can really change the course of our lives because we have the North Node going into Cancer on the 7th of November, and the North Node transit is kind of like your marker or your kind of like a guidepost of the direction you're supposed to be going in. And it's also kind of linked with destiny. So things can happen based upon the house that it transits through that really connect with things that are meant to be. And if you look at your natal chart and what sign your North Node is in and what house it's in, this is more of a permanent kind of a directive in terms of your soul's mission. And then the South Node is kind of like telling you that you've already been there and done that. And it's like your karmic past. So the same thing applies, maybe in a milder sense, to the transit of the North Node. And I'll get into that in a minute, but I just wanted to let you know about that. And then the very next day, we have Jupiter going into Sagittarius, which is the sign that it rules. If you want to find out more information about that, I'm talking about in-depth information, please check out my separate video for your sign on Jupiter going into Sagittarius. For Taurus, it's going to be in the 8th house. And so these are the two things that are happening. And also your ruler, Venus, goes direct this month after retrograding since October 5th. So, but then Mercury goes retrograde. So we still are going to have to deal with a retrograde in November, but we're nearing the end of that. Of course, we're also nearing the end of 2018, the year of retrogrades. So I haven't even really looked at 2019 with the intention of really looking at the transits. Obviously, I've done so for private readings, but in terms of really just seeing the overall picture, I will be doing a forecast for 2019 for all of the signs coming up within the next month, I'm assuming. Or I should say intending. That's more decisive, isn't it? So as the month begins, the sun is in Scorpio, and this is your opposite sign, Taurus. This is the 7th house of committed partnership. And the sun being here, the sun is a positive influence. It's healing. It can be warm, so there is a lot of affection. And if you're having any problems in relationships, you may find the means to solve them and heal them. And I'm trying to look here. There is going to be another 7th house transit with the new moon. The new moon goes into this sector on the 7th of the month, which, by the way, I believe is Diwali, which is a Hindu festival of the lights, I think it's called. Now, isn't that interesting that we have Diwali and then we have Hanukkah, and isn't that called the Festival of the Lights? A lot of these things are like very similar when you get right down to it. If I'm wrong about that, somebody please correct me. But because I'm by no means an expert on it. But I just find it interesting. It does change from year to year, depending on, and I think Hanukkah probably does too, with the other calendar. But I just found that was quite interesting. So the new moon is on the 7th, and that's going to be a new beginning in your marital sector. And I say sector, sector. But yeah, I mean, it depends. I was just thinking in my mind that you might be getting divorced. Who knows? And I'm saying this is something that you've already planned to do from before. And the new moon in the 7th house could be some kind of a legal decision, because the 7th house can be that gives you a new lease on life and kind of a change in your marital status, if you will. But for people that are coupled and they really want that sense of being in a couple, maybe like you've been working different shifts and you haven't really been connecting with one another, maybe this will be a new phase where you're doing a lot more stuff together. If one of you got your work schedule altered, or just other life changes that have made it more possible to do things together. So that's nice. That's a positive influence for relationships. And we all know that Taurus loves to be in a relationship. Ruled by Venus, there's a lot of romantic interest with the sign of Taurus. And Taurus rising. I keep forgetting to talk about the rising sign. All the Taurus rising people in the house, I am one of them. So it's very interesting. So Mars, so as the sun enters the month in the 7th house, Mars is in the 10th house of career. And this makes you very, very ambitious, and maybe even working very hard on a project. And when Mars is in a house, it's not just the ambition that gets riled up, but the physicality can come into it, where there is this sense of having inexhaustible energy. So if you have something that you're really trying to accomplish, maybe you have a deadline and you really want to get something out into the world, because the 10th house is kind of your stage. It's the top of the chart. You will have the physical ability to do it. And this is very important. You can have all the ambition in the world, but if you don't have the physical strength to carry it out, it doesn't mean anything. But you have to be careful with this, with Mars in a particular house like the 10th house, because if you're working for somebody else, you could step on some toes, especially with people who have seniority over you, have like authority over you. And there could be some conflict with these people or that person. And Mars can always bring conflict too. So you have to kind of like tone it down. If you're in this zone where you want to do certain things, be mindful of those around you. Don't be too willing to do whatever it takes to succeed. On the 6th, Uranus, which is in retrograde motion, it was in your sign in October, but now on November 6th, it goes into Aries, retrograding. And this is the 12th house. And Taurus has had to experience this Uranus transit in the 12th house for the last 7 years. So I don't really know when it went into Aries. Maybe it was 2011 or somewhere around there. So if you think back about 7 or 8 years, I'm assuming it was more like 7 years, but if you had any kind of spiritual advancement, because the 12th house is spiritual, but this would even be like psychic tendencies, maybe some kind of unusual, sudden Kundalini experiences. I always associate it with Kundalini for some reason. I'm assuming it's because the spontaneity of the Kundalini activation can really be what Uranus is all about, where it's not something that you can schedule, control. You know, some people even try to do exercises to get their Kundalini to be activated, to rise up. And that is supposedly, that can be dangerous because it can create this premature sort of spiritual activation, or if you want to call it a, I wouldn't call it an upgrade, but an increase in that type of psychic, it's not psychic tendencies per se, but just the whole kit and caboodle when it comes to our energetic system, and you don't want to overload it. Some people have claimed that they have gone into a temporary state of insanity through Kundalini activation that was done. It kind of like overloading the circuits or something like that. And yeah, and especially now that it's retrograding, it can be even more out of control. I really believe that with everything in life, to do things in a gradual way rather than trying to attain instant enlightenment. Even with, it seems like there's a big craze with ayahuasca and things like that. And people, to me, it seems like they're looking for this quick start method to just kind of like advance. And you have to, because I was I was watching a video about somebody that had that experience of taking that plant medicine. And it was a fascinating video, and I've seen more than one. But what I noticed about this person is that after they came back and they were glowing and everything seemed like they felt like they had really like solved a lot of the issues that they didn't realize were, buried deep inside of themselves. But they eventually, and it was a lot quicker than I expected, settled back into their old neurotic patterns because nothing really had changed. It's almost like on the intellectual level that it is making you aware of something, but you have to match it up with your consciousness on an everyday basis. In other words, and the same thing applies for physical things too, I feel, is that people go on these fasts and they do all these things, but then they go back to their old lifestyle. And even if they change kind of in a very mild, subtle kind of a way, it's not bridging that gap. And that gap can actually be kind of, to me, problematic. So it can actually be more confusing to be able to see all these things about yourself that need healing, but you don't have the tools to get there yet. So it can be kind of disturbing, in my opinion. And I just don't see it. I don't see that as being something that I would want to do unless it was I was already feeling I was at that level that it was just kind of a bridge, and it was a very short bridge. But usually you're going from 0 to 80 with some of these practices. And so just be careful about that. Obviously, you're your own guru, so you make the call of what you're going to do in your life. I never tell people what to do, but I just wanted to point that out with Uranus going back into that 12th house and give another perspective, because there seems to be so much, rah, 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 do this, go to this type of ceremony and take this to get enlightened and everything. And I think that it's misleading about what you're really going to end up with afterwards. And I'm not saying that it can't be a positive experience at all. It can very well be. And it may be a catalyst for some people where it at least points the way to, gets them in a different frame of mind. I'm sure that definitely has that ability to do that. So it's not that I don't think it has any value. Of course not. So that's happening. And then we have on the 7th, that North Node going into Cancer. For Taurus, this is the 3rd house of communication. And, you know, when I think about the sign of Taurus, having told you that I have Taurus rising, but just in general, Taurus rules the 2nd house of earned income. So Taurus tends to be about tangible goods, and, you know, that includes money, that includes nature, and anything that you can manipulate with your 5 senses. Communication is a bit abstract, isn't it? And Taurus is a sign that I wouldn't normally associate with getting involved in some of these things. But guess what? Dr. Wayne Dyer, who has left this world, and I believe it's been 2 years now, Dyer had a son in Taurus, and I believe his moon might have been in Gemini, but of course Gemini is right next to Taurus. So Gemini is the ruler of that 3rd house. And Dr. Dyer was a wonderful speaker, and I know that a lot of you probably felt the same way that I did, that he was a real light and a real inspiration. And he had a great voice too, which is all about Taurus, with that ruled by the throat. So for those Taurians who do feel like they are called to do something with public speaking, or it could even be internet-based, if you are a writer and you want to start a blog or even a book, or a YouTube channel, whichever way you feel called to disseminate information, then this could be your year, or actually year and a half. Also, this could involve teaching, and likewise even learning in the sense of gathering credentials. And with the North Node, this is not just about opportunities arising, but it really being part of that path of yours, and kind of one of those markers of like, yes, this is where we're going to go right now. And I would even include moving here, although the 4th house is more of the home house. The 3rd house is your local area. And so if you're destined to live in a certain place and feel a strong connection to your community, then perhaps you will be led in the next 18 months in that direction. And it's funny, I say that because in my chart, I don't have any planets in the 3rd house, and yet I really feel, and I don't even belong to any, civic groups or anything like that, but I really feel like I am strongly plugged into my local area, just because I don't drive and I walk around or I bike, and I just kind of get the lay of the land, and I'm always kind of on foot, and I love that type of interaction at an intimate level. And that kind of involvement requires you to really enjoy where you live. So I feel like it's possible that you will find a place like this, and especially if you don't have it right now and you long for the kind of community that you can really feel a part of, and especially if you have kids and you want to give them a great experience of living in a community full of conscious people, and where you really feel a sense of affinity with them. This is something that I have experience with, because I grew up always being taught about diversity and having that kind of varied group of individuals in your environment. And that just has been something I've taken for granted. But one of the things about that is that there also has to be kind of like the same state of consciousness in a way. I'm not saying the exact same state, you know that. But I mean that you have to be on the same wavelength, because I noticed that I was living in a place that was... I couldn't put my finger on it. And then I finally realized I wasn't vibing with these people. And I was living there for like 17 years. Their interests were not my interests. And that's what was like rubbing me the wrong way, because I felt like out of place, like I wasn't in sync with where I was living. So this is kind of what I'm talking about with the North Node. It doesn't even mean that you're making all these friends in the area or anything. It's just on an energetic level, although the third house can be neighbors. So maybe you meet neighbors that end up becoming your best friends, or even your soulmate you might meet in a local area. So anyway, I don't think I've ever talked about the third house so much in my life. And then the next day, Jupiter in that 8th house, which is the house of other people's money. Sex. Maybe you'll have a lot of sex. Okay. Because Jupiter is the planet of expansion. But I'm being facetious because in terms of sex, this is soul bonding. Okay. So whether it's physical bonding through sex or what I think is even more so the case of having that emotional connection, that soul level connection. With the new moon in the 7th and Jupiter in the 8th, that could be something very significant for your union, your partnership. And also benefiting from other people's resources. So it could be like an inheritance at some point in the next 13 months or whatever. Something along those lines. On the 15th, we have Mars going into Pisces, the 11th house of hopes and wishes. So, interestingly, this is kind of something that I found out after the fact, meaning pretty recently, that the 10th house of career, don't you associate career with goals? I certainly do. And then I read that the 11th house are long-range goals. Well, it's easy to kind of confuse that with the 10th house. I think that we have to mention that we have goals in all areas of life. Meeting that special person may be a goal. Living in a certain location, as I've mentioned, may be a certain goal. Having a certain type of dwelling may be a goal. So these kinds of things do not fall into the 10th house necessarily. And these are long-range goals. So they're kind of like things that you want to do, but you don't necessarily even have a time frame because you don't know how to fit it in. You're hoping that it'll happen. And the 11th house is like your wildest dreams. Let's put it that way. It's also the house of friendships and group associations. So it can be your interactions with your own social circle, or maybe you're just really networking like crazy for some reason. It could possibly have some connection to Mars having been in the 10th house. Maybe it's like you worked on a project and now you have to get people to help you. And that requires networking, or you have to promote it through certain social circles. Again, watch for conflicts, this time with friends or groups that you belong to, I should say. The next day on the 16th, Venus goes direct. Yay. In Libra, in your 6th house of work and health. So there may have been some kind of salary negotiation in the last few weeks, and maybe now it comes to some kind of conclusion. And if this is just within yourself, you may have had to kind of really come to terms with your values and what you're doing. Is what I'm doing, does it impact the world in a positive way? And really, sit with that, consider that. On the same day, Mercury goes retrograde in the 8th house. So a planet goes direct, another planet goes retrograde. Mercury, another Mercury retrograde in the 8th house. Other people's money. Mercury can be contracts, loans, things like that. So making sure that if you're listening in October, anything that you have to do, I think taxes would definitely qualify too. So maybe if you have any kind of paperwork that involves money, to check it out ahead of time. And likewise, if you have any kind of probate issues, there might be some kind of challenge or snafu, but it's going to be temporary. And in December, when Mercury goes direct on December 6th, we have a new moon in this house, in this 8th house, the very next day. And that is going to be when the green light for everybody is happening. And we're going to breathe a big sigh of relief because we're getting rid of these retrogrades that have slowed things down. And it doesn't mean that, I'm sure some of you have accomplished things in 2018. Maybe not as much as you've wanted to, but maybe you've accomplished some things. But you may have felt like it wasn't smooth, that you didn't have a long period of time where you could just make things happen, that something was always being thrown at you that kind of took you off course. So hopefully, again, I haven't looked to see, hopefully 2019 is going to be a lot less like that. I think I was listening to another astrologer who said that it is going to be a lot less full of retrogrades, but I haven't checked for myself, so I can't vouch for that. On the 22nd, the sun goes into Sagittarius, so in that 8th house, another planet, and there's a full moon on the same day, which is kind of noteworthy because full moons don't always happen when the sun is entering a new sign. As a matter of fact, I can't remember the last time that happened. I'm sure it's going to happen. There's actually going to be an eclipse. I think it's an eclipse. I don't know, but it's definitely a full moon. I think it's a lunar eclipse on the astrological new year. So that would be interesting in 2019. But so the sun goes into Sag, and then the moon is at 0 degrees of Gemini, and it's in the 2nd house of earned income for Taurus. By the way, this is obviously, this is a general forecast, and I will explain exactly why this is the case. I have my Taurus rising at 26 degrees of Taurus. This full moon in Gemini and 0 degrees of Gemini is falling into my 1st house. Okay? So it's not falling in my 2nd house. That's not going to happen until the full moon in, what do you call it? I can't think straight. Cancer. Okay? So having said that, it's important to realize that when you hear from anybody a forecast, it's only general. Nobody can give you your specific personal astrological reading because your degree of sun or rising is everything. So, having said that, please check out below for my personal readings, the links to my natal chart interpretations, if you're interested, because that definitely is the only way to really see where everything is happening and when, because I'm talking about specific dates here, and this ain't happening for me on the 22nd. But the funny thing about it is there are some astrologers who kind of like say, okay, if you're in the first 10 degrees of the sign, the first decan of Sagittarius, okay, it's going to happen in this house. I wouldn't even dream of trying that because my mind doesn't work like that. I'd have to write it all on paper, and it would be very involved. And I'm just trying to give an overview. The only reason I could say this one with certainty is because I know my natal chart. And otherwise, I wouldn't even try to do that. So that's happening. And in the second house of earned income, this can be a situation where you are experiencing a culmination of some efforts that result in maybe money coming to you from the work that you've done. So some sort of, I would say, especially back pay could be a bonus. And because Venus, even though it's gone direct a week earlier, Venus, when it was retrograding, could bring back money that is owed to somebody. And it did go into that sixth house. So it is possible that for whatever reason, whether you hired some kind of mediator or lawyer to receive back pay from a company, whatever the case may be, or retrograde, what do they call it, retroactive pay, because you got a raise and then they needed to make up for it. That could be what is happening too. One thing I will say, though, is that this is something I guess I can kind of guarantee for most of you. Most of you are going to have this full moon in the first house. So I guess I should mention it because since it's at 0 degrees of Gemini, it is kind of straddling these two houses. And you would have to be born probably on April 20th or 21st for it to actually be in that first house. And the other thing, too, is that the unequal house system is what is used for a lot of these readings. So definitely do not just take for word whatever it is with a reading. You have to, there are free places you can go to get a chart, to put in your information. I use astro.com, but there are other ones too. And you can see it for yourself also. But anyway, so let me just talk about it in the first house. If it's falling in your first house, you may feel, now, again, we had the Taurus full moon, and everything I said for that would apply here. The first house is the house of yourself, your body, your image. And you may feel like something needs to change. Okay? Now, you always are going to have a full moon in your first house. Well, again, we're talking about with any house, we can't always guarantee within a specific house that there will be a full moon, or a new moon. But in general, this is happening every year, right? So the real question is, how do you want to present yourself to others? And with Taurus, a lot of times, I'm just going to speak as a woman. A woman may use her sexuality as a way to express herself, and then feel a sense of frustration that she's not taken seriously, or that that men are coming on to her. And even if she's heterosexual, that doesn't mean that you want men to come on to you. But I mean, I noticed this with myself, and it was around the age of 30 that I kind of stopped that. But I don't know if it was during this particular type of a transit, but that could be something you consciously reflect upon. How do I present myself versus who I want? How it's almost like your calling card, your physical appearance. And hey, if you want to have tats from head to toe, and that really feels like you're in alignment with that kind of an image, then that's who you are. But if you complain and say, oh, they think I'm some kind of irresponsible person because I have tats all over my body, and they don't realize that people with tattoos, that doesn't mean anything. That doesn't make them living a certain lifestyle, and that they're not responsible, that they don't go to work every day or whatever. you have to kind of realize that whether you like it or not, you are communicating through your appearance. And the same thing with your health, even though this is not really, that's more of the 6th house, but maybe you want to your body to be different, not because you want to impress anybody, but you just want to feel that you have more energy or something like that, and you're looking at your body as something that needs to undergo a transformation. Full moons are great times for like a detox and things like that. And the detox can be like letting go of what doesn't serve you, and it might involve the body. It might involve a certain crutch that you have image-wise. Maybe if you're a woman, you wear tight clothes, you don't really like the attention you get, but you do it because it gives you certain little perks. But you're getting to be a more mature woman, and you want to kind of get into a new phase, but you feel like you don't want to let go of that. These are just things that you can be thinking about. Doesn't mean that you have to act on them, but it's a very interesting thing to ponder. And then on the 24th, Neptune goes direct in the 11th house of hopes and wishes. And this is where Mars is at, which is kind of interesting because Mars and Neptune, are you kidding me? Oil and water. Mars is like warrior energy and Neptune is dreamy. And Neptune wants to cling to their dreams. And when Neptune has been in retrograde, you may have felt like your dreams were kind of stripped bare. That some things that you were like long-term dreams that you held dear were somehow like exposed to you, shoved in your face, and it's like, you can't do this. And now that Neptune is direct, I think that you're going to start having that sense of dreaming again in a positive sense, because I believe that we have to dream. We have to have our dreams. That's really the point of life. The problem is when people, when we talk about unrealistic dreams, it's not dreaming big. I mean, dreaming big can look unrealistic, but if you have specific talents that support those dreams, then it's not unrealistic. It's just that it's like so far from where you are right now. But some people want to do things that really are not necessarily in alignment with what their talents are, even what their interests are. They may have like these desires that maybe somebody else put on them, and they convince themselves that those were their dreams. And so you can see the misalignment when you see that the person's trying to pursue something and it's not really working out for them, even at the basic level. And they're just like, with a Taurus person, they will just keep doubling down, especially if you have Mars in Taurus. And just having that sense of trying to make something happen by just like doggedly pursuing it, instead of like reflecting on what it is that you're doing and seeing if it really is something that you should be doing. And if you keep meeting with resistance, the universe may be telling you something. And I'm all for having consistency and believing in yourself and determination, and these are qualities of a fixed sign like Taurus. But on the other hand, I think that delusion is something that has to go bye-bye, that we have to really be realistic in what we're pursuing and make sure that we're not just living in la-la land. And that kind of may have come about for you when Neptune went retrograde, that it showed you where you're living in la-la land. And maybe you've adjusted. Hopefully you have, and that you still have your dreams, that you didn't get discouraged, but that you are on a path that supports you, that you are not only the universe has your back, but you are in touch with reality, that you know what your talents are and you know where your weaknesses are and where you're not really strong, and you're not trying, it doesn't mean that you can't improve those areas, but you're not trying to do something that is not consistent with what you came here to do. Okay, Taurus. Well. Almost 40 minutes of me yammering on. I hope that you enjoyed this, and I hope that you have an awesome month of November. Please check me out if you'd like a personal reading. The links are below. Take care. Bye.